Greetings, friends of liberty. 'Tis only meet we examine the state of the Irish family, as it exists in the Kingdom of Ireland today, and the unfortunate and even at times beastly treatment they have incurred at the hands of His Majesty's government and agents these centuries past. However, two intrinsic Hibernian traits, it must be said, immediately render a progressively more equitable treatment difficult. Firstly, it must indubitably be noted that they are of Celtic stock, and as admirable as their martial qualities are, whilst serving on the fighting tops or in our rifle regiments, their rebellious nature, which often wants fighting and not reconciling, can present difficulties. Secondly, their manifest obedience to their papal master, ensconced in his eternal city, leads one to wonder how loyal their attachment to our government really is. For this last reason, a very fortunate occurrence indeed was both the death, in 1766, of the old pretender, James Stuart, the Catholics' king over the water, living in France, as well as the subsequent admission by the Pope himself, Pius VI, of the legitimacy of English kings of Hanoverian descent to rule the Emerald Isle. Indeed, 'twas welcome that even the Supreme Pontiff of the Universal Church finally admitted to his error. These two developments, amongst others, allowed firstly for Irish penal laws to be less rigorously enforced, secondly, allowed the passing of the Irish Act of 1774, which permitted Catholics to pledge their royal fealty, thirdly, in the Catholic Relief Act of 1778, which enabled Catholics to both enlist and buy land, fourthly, the ability for Catholics to buy a horse worth more than £5, which previously was designed to prevent the development and training of war horses, and fifthly, the ability to start schools themselves. Clearly, very elementary rights all men should possess. God grant the remaining restrictions may also be removed if our Gaels prove deserving of their newfound freedoms. Now, if we turn to modern times, and the subject of minorities, whether white or black, in your own 21st century in America, we find today someone concerned with just such a topic, the state of the black family, with former Brooklyn College professor Robert Cherry's 2023 book addressing just such issues. Let's find out whether Cherry, an economist who began his career as a card-carrying Marxist in 1973 in writing Class Struggle and the Nature of Class, but has since migrated to arguing for global sweatshops, really has the intellectual wherewithal to significantly A, understand the causes of the relative underperformance of the black community in America, and B, how to improve it. He starts by giving us statistical snapshots. So, for example, among the U.S.'s 50 largest cities, 8 have black populations that comprise more than 36% of residents. These 8 cities, Milwaukee, Detroit, Memphis, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Washington, Baltimore, and Cleveland, stand out on a range of measures. Poverty and homicide rates are 2 to 3 times higher than in the other 42 cities. In another, he notes that in 2010, 15% of all black men had been incarcerated, and 33% had been convicted of a felony at some point. In yet a third snapshot, he remarks that black Americans committed hate crimes at a rate 3 times higher than whites from 2015 to 2019. Zooming in to a more specific focus, the issue of gun crime and violence, He notes that in 2019, among males aged 15 to 34, the black firearm homicide rate was 20 times higher than the white. In addition, from 2017 through 2019, 2,095 children ages 11 years old or younger were injured or killed by gunfire. What answers does he then suggest for gun violence? A, using the type of programs tried in Pittsburgh and Boston, where representatives of the police visit known high-frequency criminals and warn them to shape up, otherwise they will be incarcerated. He argues that these programs have had some success. B, by making sure that the racial composition of the police force equals that of the local neighborhoods, apparently because he believes members of the same ethnic group will be better able to understand each other. C, and in using non-confrontational approaches when making traffic stops or arrests, which method he claims has reduced violent police interactions while still maintaining previous arrest rates. Let's move next to his focus on housing in the black community. He introduces this section by saying, while President Donald Trump's characterization of a crime-plagued Baltimore district as a disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess was mean-spirited, no one denies that failing black communities have damaging effects on its residents. His solutions? A, he claims that moving out of bad neighborhoods sometimes works, and that essentially everyone, white, black, and Asian, move out of bad neighborhoods when they can. B, he claims that gentrification can sometimes have a positive effect on black neighborhoods, so he's for government funding of it. C, he believes in also allowing the alternate use of Section 8 housing vouchers to subsidize down payments for mortgages, as well as in allowing governmental aid for tax relief for legacy residents of gentrifying neighborhoods. And D, finally, he believes in forcing developers to dedicate some portion of their newly built housing to low-income residents. Next up, he focuses on the dynamics of the black family, again giving grim statistics. A, by 1990, 67% of black children were born to unmarried women. This share began to stabilize so that in 2018, it was only slightly higher at 69.4%. By contrast, the rate was 28.2% among white women. B, this high rate has drastic effects on black males, resulting in much higher incarceration rates for those without fathers, although he notes that when fathers are not biologically related, in other words, when stepfathers are around, the outcomes are worse than when no fathers are around. C, he claims that oftentimes black women face barriers to marriage and to delaying childbearing, one barrier being that many black women cannot find black partners who have at least the same level of educational attainment, another being that among those ages 25 to 29, there were 27% more black women than black men. Solutions? Here again, as in other areas, he advocates more governmental programs, such as the Healthy Marriages and Relationships Initiatives, HMRIs, that serve close to 200,000 families annually, by essentially doing therapy or counseling with individuals or couples, and secondly, by recommending that the government delay cutting benefits for single mothers when they get married to incentivize their getting married. Switching to education, here we find that A, he recognizes the truth that Head Start programs, early preschool, aren't effective in the long run, with early gains evaporating later, and B, that charter schools, especially those like Harlem Success, are often a significant improvement and have fewer disciplinary problems. Charters, interestingly, are much more supported by black than white parents, 58 to 26%, potentially because liberal whites tend to dislike educational choice and freedom. He adds that research has shown or shows that 60% to 70% of vulnerable students become chronically disengaged in 7th and 8th grades. This results in black high school students spending substantially less time on homework than other groups of students. On higher ed, Cherry gives us another dismal stat. At Northeastern Illinois University, only 11% of black students graduated within 6 years in 2019. White students are 5 times more likely to graduate. He adds, criticizing and disapproving of the lowering of academic standards, that I witnessed this devaluation during my last 20 years of teaching. The city university system used to have a set of assessment exams in math, writing, and reading comprehension. Also on higher ed, he points out that for many aspiring black college students, it may be better to get vocational certificates than a 4-year college degree, which adds unnecessary debt and no necessary increase in job availability. He also recalls his own difficulties at Cornell as an undergraduate, where it took him extra semesters to get adjusted academically. He says, I was an uncultured working-class kid who had one thing going for him, strong math skills. Similarly, he counsels caution for young black students going to college, since it can be all overwhelming both socially and academically. Finally, let's switch to the last topic, that of black unemployment and work programs. Here, he claims that, with regard to unemployment, where black workers face unemployment exclusion, it is because of hiring practices instituted by company managers seeking profits, not the power of the white-controlled unions whose rank and file often loudly supported President Trump. He interestingly believes that over the last decades, it has been Latinos rather than whites who seem to enjoy the most privilege at employment sites that hire low-skilled workers. For example, he says, studying New York City cafeteria workers at a major financial corporation, sociologist Mary Waters found an almost complete turnover from African Americans to Caribbean American workers as the firm increasingly relied on immigrant referrals. Solutions? He appears to support the governmental giving of jobs to qualified teens, saying, federal funding for summer employment must be expanded and paid internships during the school year made more widely available. In addition, he approves of subsidized vocational training, saying that the U.S. Department of Labor is allocating $40 billion to facilitate a 5-fold expansion of apprenticeships, creating 50 apprenticeship institutes throughout the nation, and $1,000 per apprentice per year as a state tax credit. In terms of allowing employers to use tests to determine aptitude, his approach on the one hand appears to be a qualified yes on tests, but no on the related question of whether employers can ask whether a person has a criminal record. So now, having seen how Cherry approached his approach, what are we to make of it? I would say, if we were to judge Cherry on a dial ranging from Marxist to classical liberal, he's more than halfway to classical liberal, maybe 60% or 2/3, he having no problem throughout the book calling out the many liberals and their silly CRT theories and policies. But the main problem still is his liberal belief that government should tax the general population and then somehow spend it on the black community better than it's doing now. That's his basic answer. But that answer and method and solution couldn't be more fundamentally mistaken, because it leads him to be blind to the enormous and disproportionate harms that government is doing right now to the black community. Let me list some of these extremely harmful effects. Number 1, the drug war. The drug war is enormously destructive of the black community and exacerbates all the problems that he's trying to fix. Nowhere does he say legalizing all drugs would bring enormous peace to the inner city by eliminating 95% of the profit that goes to drug selling and dealing and eliminating gangs shooting each other and their neighborhoods up. Legalizing all drugs would reduce the black incarceration rate significantly, which would increase male work experience and employment rates. Since 1/3 of all black males in America have a felony, it would reduce rates of crime and homicide. It would bring peace and stability to many black neighborhoods, also allowing property values to rise in the inner city, which he directly complains about, saying, on average, a neighborhood murder has 70 times the effect of other crimes in persuading households to relocate, so that a high-violence neighborhood suffers reduced property values and business investment. So he's oblivious to the causes of all these enormous harms while complaining about the results. Thus, he understands stats, but neither significant causes nor solutions. Number 2, once drugs are legalized, stop the gun control which is now practiced in many democratic cities. Legalize all gun possession by responsible citizens. Giving the good guys guns would let them take back control of their neighborhoods, especially since the bad guys, the drug dealers, would have little reason to be violent after legalization. Just doing these two things, legalizing all drugs and allowing gun possession by responsible citizens, would conservatively result in an 80% reduction in black homicide rates. Probably more. Number 3, abolish governmental education. It's also enormously destructive of both black and white children, its education being significantly worse, especially in the inner city. He himself mentions how public schools have gotten away from teaching phonics, without realizing that private schools would never do something that stupid. But if they did, the parents would pull the children and put them in a school with phonics. And never once does he call out the teachers' unions as one of the main reasons for the relative patheticness of public schools. These unions damaging black children, their knowledge, and their ability to get a job generation after generation after generation. All he does is advocate for charter schools, which are somewhat better than regular public, partly because teachers' unions aren't allowed there. In regards to his complaint of disengagement, in private schools, children are less likely to become disengaged. Number 4, stop governmental welfare and the welfare state. Private welfare and charity given by private individuals and institutions is always the most efficient because it can judge who needs charity better. In contrast, his main focus is redirecting governmental welfare and funding streams, or in coercing the private sector to participate in governmental programs. Number 5, Cherry should stop fighting immigration, i.e. stop trying to make a cartel of American workers. The immigration of hardworking immigrants from other countries, as long as they're not criminal and don't get public welfare, is good for blacks, not bad, as he argues. Adding a hardworking, non-criminal immigrant is no different than if American parents brought up a hardworking, non-criminal son or daughter themselves. No difference. Should that not be allowed? So blacks won't have to compete as hard in the job market? Hardworking people from all other countries increase the degree of competition, and competition raises everyone's performance. Would Cherry try to increase the abilities of a black football or basketball team by having it avoid competition with Mexicans? If not in sports, why at work? In addition, if Cherry would get rid of the structural problems I've mentioned above, like the drug war and public schools and all the others caused by government, blacks would soon both be free and highly successful in their competition with everyone. In addition, getting rid of minimum wage laws would be effective in reducing black teen unemployment. Cherry, the economist, breathes not a word of this. In addition, in labor markets, he has no problems blaming employers, trying to make it their fault, as when he states that leading high-tech firms have long argued that there is a limited pipeline of successful black students at the elite universities. Perhaps they should expand their recruitment beyond those few elite universities. Here, yet again, he's wrong. The problem is that there really is a limited pool of these black candidates for STEM and tech, for all the structural and systemic reasons I just listed, caused by government. Similarly, like a typical liberal, he comes out against employer colorblindness, saying, seemingly colorblind hiring procedures can drastically limit the share of qualified black applicants who reach the interview stage. This is again the wrong approach, as it is when he blames employers for being biased against blacks by requiring excessive educational credentials. Number 6. He's right that higher education is a waste of money for lots of people, but is oblivious to the necessity of privatizing it, completely eliminating all governmental subsidies and control, which raise the price. That would vastly decrease the price of tuition conservatively by 50%, making both professional and vocational degrees more affordable. So in conclusion, in this book, Cherry does one thing right and two wrong. He gives us lots of great stats about the present state of the black family and community, but almost completely misunderstands what's causing their present underperformance, and thus the solutions for raising it. If he understood the desirability of stopping government disproportionately damaging black families, I wouldn't have to give him a C-D+. Very happy for my part that my England is leading the way in its humane treatment of its black citizens. Lord Mansfield recently having set judicial precedent in disallowing the holding of slaves in Britain, I bid you well and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.